This is Laura from the Peaceful Life podcast, and you're listening to Pop Goes Your World.
If you haven't already, subscribe on iTunes. And while you're there, please leave us a rating and review.
And now it's time for our feature presentation.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 180, Reservoir Dogs movie review. Chris McBrien along with Derek Myers, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. Derek, 180 episodes. How the hell did we ever get here, my friend?
Yeah, you said that, and I was like, episode 180. I'm like, I think he flubbed that up. We're going to have to start again. And it's like, no, I think we're getting close to 200. Holy cow.
Crazy. 200 episodes means we will get syndicated.
All right.
So
yeah, all that mad money from syndication. Yeah, let the paychecks come in.
Yep. Finally. So how you doing?
Good. It's been a crazy week. I've been busy at work, and the good news is it's mid-May. The weather's starting to get nicer. I'm able to go and do once a day, every day. I ride my bike. I do my exercises, and I'm finally able to get back outside and do my rides outside. And today was the first day in 2021 that I was able to take a very quick swim in my own swimming pool. It was a little chilly, but after a long, hard ride on the bike, I'm all hot and sweaty, came home, jumped in the pool. It was about 75 degrees, which is about 5 to 10 degrees cooler than I like it. But no, it was nice to get back in there. And it just, that to me is a signal that it's spring and summer's on the way. So put me in a really good mood, despite the fact that the water was so cold.
I can definitely relate. I'm a big exercise guy myself.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
No, I'm not. I'm a big pop culture guy.
You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Exactly. Speaking of which, what's new in pop culture in your world?
Well, as I mentioned, I've been pretty busy, so I haven't had a chance to do too much, but there's just two quick things I wanted to talk about. Sure. The first is I had a chance, sometimes when you go to watch a movie, you want to watch a film, a capital F film, something that's going to enrich your life, something that maybe has a lot of critical accolades. It won an Oscar, or it was nominated for some important award, or it's the performance of the career from some very important actor or actress. Other times you just say, I just want to be entertained. I don't care how based in reality this movie is. I just want to turn my brain off and have fun with it. And I found a movie that fell into category 2 this week. Okay. It's an action film called The Transporter. Have you ever seen it? Have you ever heard of it?
I you know me with new pop culture. I don't know any of this stuff.
It's from 2002.
I for some reason I'm thinking Jason Statham or whatever.
Yeah, Jason Statham. That's exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have heard of it.
It's a crazy action movie. It's written by Luc Besson, who did movies like The Fifth Element and The Professional, which we reviewed on an earlier episode.
Leon.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, The Transporter is like, I've seen the beginning of the movie at least a dozen times. The first 20 minutes is this like high speed car chase. Bank robbers are being pursued by the police, and the main character is the quote unquote transporter who's hired to get the bad guys from point A to point B for a particular amount of money. And it's just this nonstop crazy action car chase. And so I've seen that opening sequence a bunch of times. Like when I see coming up next on TV, The Transporter, I'm like, well, I'm going to stick around for 20 minutes to watch this opening sequence. And then that's usually where I stop it. And I realized I've never actually seen the entire movie start to finish. So it was on TV a couple weeks ago. I recorded it or on one of the movie channels. So I actually sat down. Well, not sat down. I was riding my exercise bike this week and I watched it while I was exercising. And sure enough, that first half hour, awesome. And then I found I really enjoyed the second half. I finally sat down and watched the whole thing. I really liked it, but it's not going to win an Oscar, but it's a pretty good action movie. I like Jason Statham. I find he's a really, he's a pretty good action star. He's easy on the eyes. He's in good shape, and he's got a good sense of humor. He's got like good action movie charisma, and no, it's decent. And I learned that they made 2 sequels, so I guess in the next couple of weeks I'll have to hunt down the Transporter 2 and the Transporter 3, which, sequels are always better than the first movie, so who knows how these are going to be. But that was my first one. I assume you've never seen it?
No. Like I say, I kind of heard of it, so
yeah.
For me.
You make 2 sequels. It obviously made enough money that they felt it was that they're going to go. And I imagine it wasn't that expensive to make, but there were a lot of explosions and a lot of car chases. So if that's the kind of movie you're into, where it's just I'm going to turn off my brain and watch an action movie with car chases and explosions, you're probably going to dig this movie. So anyway, that was my first one. The other thing I wanted to, and I think I mentioned this before, one of the channels that I have on my cable package, on the weekends, they do a show that's like top 10. They do top 10 pop culture lists. And they did a list this week that really intrigued me. It was the top 10 movie soundtracks from the 1990s. Now, I know that's a little outside of your comfort zone because, it's past 1989, right. But how was your involvement with music soundtracks in the 90s, Chris?
Oh, it wouldn't be great. A lot of independent films in the 90s. So I think of things like Pulp Fiction had a good soundtrack.
Pulp Fiction, number 10 on the list.
Yeah,
good pick.
That was pretty good. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head.
So I'll run down the list for you. And it was a pretty impressive list. I was like, every time I'm like, oh yeah, that one was good. Oh yeah. And of course it was a lot of movies that were that featured like older songs. Sure. Like one of the ones on the list is Forrest Gump. Like that's a great soundtrack. Right. Features all that music from, the 60s and 70s. But so yeah, movie, anyway, it was a neat list. So I just wanted to share it with the listeners and share it with you. So this was this was picked by the viewers. So
probably I'm interested because probably lots of these will be like, oh yeah, that's a good one.
Exactly.
I'm dying to know. So
from 10 down to 1 here. So it was Pulp Fiction.
Okay.
Pretty Woman.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Friday. Batman Forever. Seal, Kiss from a Rose and such.
I know. Hold on a second. So I'm going to just show how cool and young and hip I am. I remember there's a really good song from Friday called You Can Do It, Put Your Back Into It.
Sure. Yeah. That was the only soundtrack on the list I wasn't that familiar with. But when they were playing the songs, I'm like, oh, I've heard this. Oh, I know that. So,
like I say, I'm young and I'm hip. So, it is.
Sure. Where were you? Okay, Batman Forever was number 7.
Yep.
Can't Hardly Wait was number 6.
Okay.
Dazed and Confused, number 5.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Dazed and Confused was a movie about the 70s, so it's all 70s songs.
Yeah.
Singles, which was sort of like the start of grunge in the 90s. So it's a who's who in the Seattle music scene in the 90s. Forrest Gump, we already talked about. Reality Bites was number 2.
Oh, okay.
And Wayne's World was number 1.
Oh, nice. Bohemian Rhapsody, of course. Nice.
Yeah, no, it was a good list. I was pretty impressed. A lot of times I watch this and like their list, they always have 5 or 6 on the list. So you're like, yeah, okay, those should be on the list. And then they have 3 or 4 where you're like, really? Who put this list together? But that was a pretty solid list. So yeah. Unfortunately, again, this week, no documentaries, but I understand there are a series of biographies coming out on the A&E channel featuring a bunch of the wrestlers from the 80s from the WWF. So I think I'm going to pull those up on demand. And by next week, we should have a couple of those under our belt. So we'll talk about those on an upcoming podcast.
You were never a big wrestling fan. I liked wrestling back in the 80s. I thought it was pretty good, like WrestleMania 3 and stuff like that back in 1987. But yeah, I like that stuff. I used to watch Saturday Night's Main Event. Too,
nice.
Hulk Hogan and stuff. Oh, it was all good. So I got something for you this week. Robbie Rose, our good buddy, also known as Robbie Baseball. Remember he was on our show when he did the Mighty Ducks.
Mighty Ducks. Yeah. Yep.
He's a co-host of the Dingers podcast with Ty Childs. And there's a new app called Clubhouse. I don't know if you're familiar with Clubhouse, but it's basically a place where it's kind of a cool place where you can kind of go on and you can create kind of like almost like a panel show thing, and people interact and they come and they listen and then everyone speaks together. You can interact with people. So they asked me to join a panel and talk about baseball, which is a big love of mine. Other than pop culture, like maybe like my second biggest love in the world, right? And I joined the panel. There was Michael Govier was on. He's a great guy. And the Welsh, I've been friends with the Welsh forever. And Ellen Adair was on it. She's a big Phillies fan. She's an actress, Derek. She was in Homeland and Billions. That's a show you like. I know that.
Yeah, Billions is great.
So it was a great panel. Really, really great. And we got to talk about things like, kind of like what brought us to the game of baseball, like what we love about the sport and kind of the friends that we've made as a result of, the game itself, and even especially like playing fantasy baseball and things like that. And the thing was that I thought was interesting, like other than I wanted to share that I was there and it was great, was the fact that they kept calling me something the whole time I was on the show. They kept calling me the OG. Because I was one of the very first. So I don't know if you know this, Derek, but back in the day, I started a fantasy baseball podcast back when there were no fantasy baseball podcasts outside of the big guys like ESPN, CBS, and then there was me. And I did this show called Dear Mr. Fantasy, and it became quite popular. So as a result, a lot of people since then have had independent fantasy baseball podcasts, come to the forefront, right? So they were calling me the OG, and I was like, guys, funny that you call me that because I wrote a song called I'm the OG. I didn't play it for them there. I didn't think it was appropriate, but I'd like to revisit it again here if you don't mind. So just for everybody that joined us in Clubhouse, here it is. I'm the OG. When it comes to me, it's something different. Don't you see? I am the OG, and it is me. O is easy, it stands for old. G is not for gangster, it stands for kind told. OG is old guy, and that is me. I am the OG. I'm the OG. Yeah, you know me. Yeah, I'm the OG. Yeah, you know me. I'm PHAT. Yeah, you know me. I like old movies. I'm so groovy. Yeah, you know me. I got no groupies. Yeah, you know me. But I'm the OG. Yeah, you know me. Yeah, I'm the OG. So there it is. I'm the OG. I got a chance to play it again. I'm so glad.
Nice.
And like I say, they kept calling me the OG. It was funny. At the beginning of the show, they do this thing that they do on Dingers as well, where they ask, what are you drinking? At the beginning of the show. Hey, what's everybody drinking tonight? And so I was like, since I'm the OG, I guess I'm drinking Geritol. I don't know. so there's that.
I think they say like Labatt 50, and I'm like, oh, that's an old man beer.
Definitely. For those Canadians out there listening, they definitely know that's the case. And another thing that old guys like is this.
Here's your dad joke of the week.
All right, Derek, you're a big Batman fan, so I wanted to cater to you this week. I know how much you like Batman. Let's go. Derek, what do you call Batman when he skips church?
I have no idea.
Christian Bale.
Boo.
See, he's a Christian, and he bailed on church, so he's Christian Bale.
Yeah.
Derek.
It wasn't that I didn't laugh because I didn't get it.
I'll see myself out.
Good.
Who would win in a fight between Celine Dion and Justin Bieber?
Like love-hate relationship?
What does that even mean?
Hey man, $10 is $10.
I think it's getting warmer in here. Oh. You ever notice in movies they never look at the road when they're driving?
We've never been separated before.
Nice effects, eh?
Hey, maybe this Tim Hortons donut will change your mind, eh?
Take off, eh?
They walk in on the parents doing it?
No, I'm not doing that. I don't do that. Okay, so last week you nominated Martin Scorsese's The Departed. And this week it was over to me to find a film that in some way ties into your movie. So I decided to go with 1992's Reservoir Dogs. It relates to The Departed in a few ways, at least in my mind. First, there's the plot of the cop who infiltrates a crime gang, in order to kind of bring it down. And there's lots of machismo and violence and profanity. And it's from one of the premier directors in Hollywood history. So for those reasons, I felt it was the perfect complement for The Departed. And it's also kind of a Gen X counterpart to that movie. So I just felt it would work. It's also really good, at least in my opinion. We'll see how you feel about things. So with that being said, Derek, what is your initial take on going back and watching Tarantino's debut film, Reservoir Dogs?
So I'd seen it before.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it many times before. I'm a big fan of Tarantino. And this movie is definitely, in my mind, one of his better movies. So I hadn't actually sat down to watch it in a while, but certain movies, it's like if someone says, hey, when was the last time you sat down to watch Star Wars? it's probably been a while, but I know the movie pretty well. So Reservoir Dogs, certainly haven't seen it as many times as Star Wars, but I've seen it enough that, you know, I didn't really get much new out of it this time, but I certainly enjoy it, and I enjoyed it again, and it was good opportunity to go back and revisit it. You get to see some of those performers. You know, the movie's almost 30 years old now, so you're like, oh wow, look at how much younger some of these people are, how much thinner some of these people are. Even Quentin Tarantino himself, who appears briefly in the movie, he looks a lot younger, a lot skinnier. It's you just, in your mind, you sort of always think certain performers are going to look and act and behave a certain way. And I think for me, a lot of those performers, that's how I remember them, is from Reservoir Dogs. Because for some of them, that was sort of the first time, like Tim Roth, definitely. I think that was the first time I'd ever seen him on screen. So in my mind, that's sort of always how I remember him. But no, I really enjoyed it. I liked it a lot, and looking forward to talking a little bit more about it.
So funny enough, the movie was completely ignored at the box office when it came out. It was released on only 61 screens when it debuted, and that was on October the 23rd, 1992. It originally was scheduled to have a budget of $30,000. Tarantino was just going to shoot it on black and white. And then he ended up getting a budget of $1.5 million. It wound up grossing just $2.8 million at the box office domestically in the US. It finished 143rd that year. It got outperformed by such luminaries as Blame It on the Bellboy, The Gun in Betty Lou's Handbag, and Dr. Giggles. So the number one movie that year was Batman Returns, followed by Lethal Weapon 3, Home Alone 2, Lost in New York was up there. A lot of sequels, eh? Wayne's World, which you just mentioned not that long ago, was number 5 at the box office that year. League of Their Own, a couple other movies in there. Patriot Games was big. A Few Good Men. But it came out late in the year. So A Few Good Men came out in December.
In all fairness, though, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit more, like, so this is, you got to remember the time when this movie came out. This is the early, like, it came out when, 92, I believe?
92, yeah.
So this was early 90s. This is when we're starting to see more independent films. This was when we're seeing companies like Miramax that are trying to find those gems in the rough that they can snap up and have these films made for small amounts, hoping for big rewards. They're giving up and coming filmmakers, producers, directors, writers opportunities with bigger budgets to try and, you know, make their mark. And from what I understand from doing some homework on this is, you know, the movie didn't have a very big budget, and it didn't have any real marketing behind it, and it was just thrown out there. And that's part of the reason it did not do so well upon its initial theatrical release. But as we've learned from so many of Tarantino's projects that come after this, it found its place on home video, and that, I got to think, is where it started making a lot of money. And obviously, based on the strength of that, we have Quentin Tarantino has the career he has today. So anyway, I'm sure I'm stepping a little on your toes here, but
no, and I'm glad that you mentioned like independent films, because really it was, I want to say it was like 94 with Pulp Fiction when independent films and Miramax really came to the forefront. But I think one of the first movies that came out, one of the first films that came out that really kind of started that whole independent thing was Sex, Lies, and Videotape, Soderbergh's.
Yeah.
Really
Soderbergh,
kind of kickstarted. But,
I've never seen it. I've heard it's good, but I've never seen it.
So let's talk a little bit about the director. Tarantino, obviously. So like you, Derek, Tarantino spent his younger years working at a video rental store. Now, obviously, unlike you, he went on to become a successful movie director. Now, that's not to say...
I'm glad you added movie director. I thought you were going to say, unlike you, he went on to be a success. I was like, hey, man.
No. That's not to say you couldn't have accomplished that. You know, you just went a different way. You chose to become a podcast host instead, right? So,
like so many young children today to aspire to become podcast hosts.
Yeah.
He's not as good as you think, kids.
Yeah. So the one story that I really like about this film was when Tarantino went to Harvey Keitel's house to discuss the script, and Keitel was like, he couldn't believe that Tarantino didn't grow up like in a tough neighborhood, you know, or surrounded by gangs and crime, because, you know, Tarantino didn't, right? And Keitel couldn't understand how the hell could this guy write this script with no personal experience with the subject matter, you know. But the answer was actually pretty simple. Tarantino not only watched, but he loved movies. Yeah. So he drew from his experience watching movies to write his script instead of from personal experience, which was kind of a new thing. You know, I mean, like, if you think about it, like in 1992, I mean, there's only been, you know, film's only been around for about 50 plus years. So, you know, really, up until that point, people were drawing from personal experience when they would write. He did something different. He drew from watching other movies, right? That's where his experience, he grew up and working in the video store, watched a lot of movies, right? So that's where he got, and he also watched a lot of foreign films, right? So he could draw from that as well. But the thing is, if you think about it, watching this movie, all the elements of his style, Tarantino style, they're all evident here in his first movie. Like there's that seemingly minutia in the dialogue. You know, I mean, the movie opens up with a bunch of guys at a restaurant talking about the meaning of Madonna's Like a Virgin and about the merits of tipping at restaurants. You know, like there's that dialogue, the great dialogue that he writes. There's the implication of violence. I think we'll come back to that in a bit too. I think it's important. There's the Mexican standoff, the nonlinear storytelling. You could probably argue that Tarantino is the most influential director of his generation. I mean, and all the elements that we have come to expect from his style of directing are all in this movie.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack, but I agree with almost everything you said. And some things even more so. Definitely I want to talk about Tarantino's master of dialogue. You figure when Tarantino was coming up in the 90s, another director that was sort of putting out films around the same time that I'm a fan of is Kevin Smith. And I found that although they had very different styles and very different subject matters in their films, both of those two writer and directors had a way with dialogue that was very different than what I was used to, very different than anything else that I had seen. And I found that, again, with Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs and Clerks all sort of coming out around the same time, I found that those were all movies that were very dialogue heavy, and you could almost listen to them like a radio play. You didn't have to actually sit and watch it to get it. Or even in some cases, it's like in all three of those examples I've seen so many times, I don't even need to watch it to know what's going on. But I found that after I had seen Reservoir Dogs a bunch of times, and I would just put it on in the background while I was doing stuff, just like you would today with a podcast or a radio broadcast or streaming music or whatever else, you start to focus more on what you're hearing rather than what you're seeing. And you really start to appreciate the dialogue even more in Tarantino's projects, especially those first couple of movies, when you have that chance to do that, when you know the visuals so well that you don't feel you're going to miss out if you're not seeing it, and you just listen and you start to pick up on little things, certain rhythm of the way the characters talk, dialogue, little mannerisms and colloquialisms, and just the way like Tarantino has characters telling jokes and just things like that. It's very, very different than if you just listen to a regular TV show or a standard movie that comes out. Like, it's just something about it. And I found Tarantino was one of the very first ones that I can remember, at least in my life, that was sort of the master of this, where the dialogue was every bit as important. What you're hearing them say and how they say it is every bit as important as what you're seeing on the screen. And I think, like you said, this was hugely influential on a whole generation of filmmakers.
I mentioned it wasn't very popular at the box office. It wasn't popular with critics either. Most critics felt it was boring. They said it was overly violent, which they were wrong about too, by the way. I think we need to stick a pin in that. I want to come back to that in a bit.
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
Important. So another thing I found was kind of interesting as I kind of was digging into this movie. So Tarantino makes his directing debut with this movie. It's a heist film. And I know you like heist films, Derek. It seems there's been quite a few prominent directors over the years who have made their debut with heist films. So if you think about it, Thief back in 81, Michael Mann.
Yep.
Wes Anderson in 96 with Bottle Rocket. Brian Singer with The Usual Suspects in 95. And heck, even Woody Allen's first movie was Take the Money and Run back in 69. It's almost like the heist film is suitable for directors' first films, maybe because they can get it done with a low budget. Like, and it's all about storytelling, and you don't really need a lot of special effects. Like Jean-Luc Godard once said, all you need to make a movie is a girl and a gun. And it kind of plays out here.
That's fair.
That's what I think. I want to talk a bit about the cast in this movie, because we talked about the cast last week when we were talking about The Departed. And I wasn't really keen on the cast with The Departed. I felt it was a little miscast. Unlike that film, I thought this film was perfectly cast. So Lawrence Tierney, he's basically this legendary Hollywood tough guy. and not just on screen either. He had a lot of run-ins with the law in his personal life, usually for drinking too much and getting in fights. But he had a long career. Like, he was Dillinger back in 45. He was on Star Trek: The Next Generation. That would really like that show. Not that I never watched an episode.
Again, I don't remember.
And he was Elaine's dad on Seinfeld. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh yeah.
The episode where Jerry had that new jacket, remember? But he was perfect in this movie. Like, he's got that gravelly voice and he's barking orders and swearing at everyone. I thought he was fantastic. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really know him, or I didn't really remember his body of work. Again, when I saw this in the 90s, he was probably one of the performers that I knew the least about. So he certainly brought to the screen what that character needed. He needed to be someone who was clearly the brains of the operation. He was older. He was the money. It was his idea. And he obviously, the character is supposed to have this credibility from a long, hard life that put him on the top. And so that definitely came across. Even though I didn't know this actor, the performer was able to deliver that. And from what you're saying, he may not even really been acting. It may have just, close to home. But no, I had no problems with, again, he doesn't have a large part in the movie. He doesn't have a lot of screen time, but you definitely can feel his presence when he's there, for sure.
Chris Penn, I thought, was great in this movie. And when this movie first came out in 92, this was the first thing that I'd seen him in since Footloose. And he looked so different. Like, he'd put on a lot of weight, and it was such a different character, but he was really, really good in this. Such a great name too. Nice Guy Eddie, and he was
gangsters, right? Gangsters all get nicknames and stuff. So
that's right. Well, it's nicknames in this, right?
Yeah, and you got to wonder, is it one of those ones where it's a nickname that is like one of those opposites where you call a bald guy Curly? Like, is it Nice Guy Eddie because he's exceptionally violent and he's like a real jerk? Or is he the peacekeeper when two guys can't back down? Nice Guy Eddie gets sent in to calm them down. Like, it's those details that are not explained in the movie that are interesting enough to make you think about it. So
yeah, because we never really find out the answer to that, right? No. But remember, he was in True Romance that we watched a few weeks ago, which was another script written by Tarantino too, by the way. Yeah. But anyway, so Chris Penn, he died in 2006 from heart disease. He was only 40 years old. I felt he was a very unique actor. Like, I liked him. I thought he was so memorable in Footloose. He got to dance to one of the most memorable songs of the 80s with Denise Williams' Let's Hear It for the Boy. This guy does not strike you as a real musical kind of guy, but I thought he was great in this. Harvey Keitel, we got to mention. He was some pretty inspired casting, I think. Not only did he have a pedigree of, starring in early Scorsese movies like Mean Streets and Taxi Driver, but he kind of came into this role as like a mentor to some of the other characters. He was probably a mentor to some of the other actors behind the scenes as well. I just think he gives this movie a little bit of gravitas, So this is the first movie I remember seeing Harvey Keitel in. So again, like I was saying off the top, for me, that's part of why I think this movie has stuck with me so much over the years. Is it's got a lot of actors who are big names or went on to have great careers, and for me, so many of them, this is the first time I saw them. This is the first time I remember seeing them, and he's definitely falls into that category. So you hadn't seen Taxi Driver when you saw this film?
No, I had not.
Yeah, see, I had already. I'd already seen Taxi Driver, so I knew him as Matthew the Pimp in that. So I liked him. I thought he was really good in this. Like, I thought his character was good. And you mentioned Quentin Tarantino, and like a lot of directors, he features himself quite a bit in most, if not all, of his movies. He sometimes just does small cameos, or a lot of times he just provides like an off-screen voice. But sometimes he gives himself speaking roles, although I don't think he's a very strong actor, I will say.
No, I agree. And I think he understands his own limits. And, again, I'm going to keep drawing a lot of parallels to Quentin Tarantino and Kevin Smith. I mean, I enjoy their works equally, but, well, maybe not even equally. I enjoy both of their works, but I'm not saying that that Smith is anywhere near as good as Quentin Tarantino. They're good at different things, but they do share a lot of similarities. And I think that both Smith and Tarantino understand that their role is the writer and the director and maybe even the producer. And if they want to put themselves into their own project, great. But you shouldn't cast yourself as the lead. And I think both of them have gone on record saying that they wish they had been able to be in their own projects more, but you need to understand your limits. And so for this one, I was reading that originally Quentin Tarantino was planning to be Mr. Pink, which was Steve Buscemi's part, which is, again, why that character has some of the most memorable dialogue, some of the most important. He's in some of the most pivotal scenes of the movie because, again, the writer's writing that for himself. And with Clerks, the same thing. Kevin Smith was going to be Dante. That's why Dante has all the best jokes in the Clerks movie, because that was originally the role that Smith was going to play for himself. So I think that Tarantino, in this one anyway, I think he did the right thing. He focused on the writing, the directing. Yeah, he wanted to be in the movie, so he gave himself a small part, knowing that his character was only going to be in a couple of scenes. And when the movie begins, it's just a black screen, and you hear the ambient noise of the diner. And then you hear the guy speaking, and the first voice you hear before we see anything is Quentin Tarantino. It's his voice is the first thing we hear in this movie. And then he's telling you the story about Madonna, Like a Virgin is about blah, 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 blah. And so he's obviously an important part of that opening sequence. But the fact that he chose to make in his first movie, the first sound, the first voice you hear on screen in his first film is his own. I'm like, I think that was a very deliberate choice, and I think it works. I think it was a good idea.
Steve Buscemi, we got to touch base on. Probably the first thing I ever saw him in. I don't think I ever saw him in Miller's Crossing or Barton Fink. I never watched those films, so I think that this was the first thing I've ever seen him in. This guy is very unique. There's no other way to describe him. Like there's no one else quite like him in Hollywood. And I think it's worked in his favor because he's never stopped working, but in this movie, he just comes across as a scumbag. I mean, he looks like a lowlife. His whole take on the tipping waitresses, he's just a jerk. Right. And then when he uses the racial slur later in the warehouse, like the whole point is to make him really unsympathetic. And of course, he's the only one that gets away. Or does he? We'll have to talk about that.
Again, you can sort of, the movie ends in the same idea where you can hear things going off in the background underneath what's really happening. And so you can draw your own conclusions, but I certainly don't think he got away. I think he went outside and he got gunned down. But I agree. I mean, I like Steve Buscemi. I think he's a good performer. He is definitely not a quote unquote classically handsome leading man. And hey, who am I to talk? But he's no Robert Redford. He's no Brad Pitt. I think he understands his lane and he sticks to it. And he's a very strong character actor. He tends to be cast as like the villain in a lot of things. He tends to be cast in sort of these kind of supporting roles. Like he's in Armageddon with Bruce Willis. And again, he's like the guy who likes to hit on the younger women, and he likes to gamble and go out with prostitutes. Like that's the kind of, like, he always plays these sleazy, scummy kinds of roles, which is not to say that the person is even like again, I don't know much about his personal life.
Who knows? He might be the greatest guy, but he just looks like that.
And I mean, he's a very good, like, I never saw, what was the Boardwalk Empire? Was that the show that he was in? I heard that he was so fantastic in that. I never watched a single one because it was on one of the channels I didn't get, but everything I've seen him in where he's been pretty good. He's obviously become friends with Adam Sandler because he appears in almost every one of Adam Sandler's movies in like little small parts. And so he obviously, he's made a lot of friends in Hollywood over the years, and he's, like you said, he continues to work, and I'm sure it's largely because of his talent, and probably a lot because he's made a lot of connections, and he must just be a decent guy behind the scenes. So
Michael Madsen is another interesting guy, really prominent in this film, but he hasn't really done a whole lot else. He's the brother of Virginia Madsen. God, she was so good in Sideways. I still cannot believe she did not win the Oscar for that movie.
Yeah, she was quite good.
Oh, man. Well, she lost to Cate Blanchett for The Aviator, but man, she was good. But anyway, so he plays Mr. Blonde, and he is one bad dude. I think we'll come back to the ear scene a little bit later. But
let's skip that.
As for the actor, he plays a pretty good despicable bad guy. I'm a little bit surprised he hasn't worked more over the years. Now Tarantino's used him in a couple movies. He was in Kill Bill 1 and 2. He was in The Hateful Eight, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But it almost seems like if it wasn't for Tarantino casting him, he wouldn't have all that many film credits. But I mean, he was in the beginning of War Games. Remember, he was one of the guys that had to turn the key.
Yeah, turn your key. Yeah.
I remember that.
But now I seem to remember that, again, rightly or wrongly, I seem to remember that he was supposed to be in Pulp Fiction. Like the John Travolta character is Vincent Vega, who Tarantino's like, oh, well, I envision these guys were brothers. But from what I remember reading was that originally Pulp Fiction was supposed to be Vic Vega. And the idea was Pulp Fiction was supposed to take place before the events in Reservoir Dogs, because obviously Mr. Blonde gets killed in Reservoir Dogs. And he wanted Michael Madsen. And then there was some issues. Again, I don't remember the specifics, but I want to say it was something to do with drug use, and Madsen was just not available. And so that was part of the reason that the changes were made for Pulp Fiction. And then look what it did for John Travolta. It kicked his career back into high gear after a fairly lengthy hiatus of being, a B or C list actor.
Literally pumped adrenaline back into his career, right?
So had Madsen been able to actually be the character that Tarantino or that John Travolta was in Pulp Fiction, things might have gone differently, right? It's the road not taken kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, personally, I don't think he's that great. I'm not a big fan of his work. I mean, he was good in this, but take him or leave him. There's 6 other people in the cast I'd rather watch before him.
Tim Roth. So outside of this movie and Pulp Fiction, he's not really an actor that I know very well. And as memorable as he is in Pulp Fiction, and he is really, really good in Reservoir Dogs. Mm-hmm. So not only the whole idea that he has to keep his identity hidden, from the gang, but for me, it all comes down to the scene when he is learning how to speak like a criminal and how to fit in without giving anything away.
The commode story.
Oh God, the cops give him that script and he's got to memorize his lines on how to tell that. Like, as a former actor myself, I love that scene. It's basically an actor playing a part where he's learning how to be an actor, Yeah. And the way Tarantino shoots that scene, it opens with this long take, which is just an actor's dream, a stage actor's dream, right? And he shoots it from below the 2 actors. I think it's Tim Roth and Randy Brooks, I think is the name of the other actor. And then when Roth finally gets the chance to kind of deploy that story to the gang, he nails it. He just got them, It's such an amazing sequence in the film. I think that Tarantino loves actors. At least it comes across on screen that he does.
Yeah. Yeah. I personally, I'm a big fan of Tim Roth. He was fantastic in the movie Rob Roy, and he was really good in the movie 4 Rooms, both of which came out in 1995. If you haven't seen those 2, I would strongly recommend them. They were both really good. 4 Rooms obviously has the Tarantino connection in that he wrote, I think, and directed one of the sequences. 4 Rooms is
I don't know that movie. Was he like a bellhop or something like
that? Yes. Ted the Bellhop. 4 Rooms is, they've got 4, it's 4 different scenes, 4 different sequences. It's 4 different stories all happening in the same hotel. And the way they're connected is through Ted the Bellhop, which is played by Tim Roth. And Quentin Tarantino wrote, directed, and stars in the 4th and final sequence of 4 Rooms. So that's obviously the Tarantino connection. And then Rob Roy was with Liam Neeson. It's a period piece that came out around the same time as Braveheart, so I think it got overlooked, but it's very strong. And then later, Tim Roth went on to star in a TV series that ran a few years called Lie to Me, where he played a character who was he was a doctor who learned how to read facial microexpressions to tell if someone was lying or not. It was quite good. It was more of a procedural kind of show. It ran from 2009, 2011. Looks like they did 48 episodes, but it was very entertaining. I went back and rewatched some of them a couple of years back. The show was on demand, and it holds up. And he's really good in it. He's a good actor. I really enjoy his work.
Going back to last week when we were talking about The Departed, you mentioned some of the recurring themes in Scorsese films, like machismo and like how they challenge each other's masculinity. And some of those themes are at play here as well. More than once, the characters try to challenge each other, especially in regard to their masculinity. The one that stands out to me is when...
Wait, hold on. I'm going to call you on that one. I disagree. I agree that they challenge each other. But with the Scorsese films, it always seems to be, for lack of a better term, it's like it's a dick measuring contest. It's literally the men trying to out macho, out man the other person. And it's like they almost feel like it's their personal identity, that I have to be more of a man's man than you. It's about gender. It's about the masculinity. With this movie, I felt it was more about power. This movie could have been made with 6 women and it would have worked the same way. I don't feel the fact that they're men is really that relevant to the power structure that happens in this movie. I mean, I think if it was cast with women, it would play out differently, but I don't think it's that macho machismo kind of one-upsmanship that you see in the Scorsese films. I think this is just intended to be more of a it's a power struggle. It's these criminals that don't know each other. And he even says that when they do this scene where they give each other names. You're Mr. Blonde, you're Mr. Pink, you're Mr. Blue. And then he's like, let us pick our own names. He goes, no. It never doesn't work that way. Nobody knows each other, so nobody wants to back down. And that's exactly what we see here, right? It's this anonymity of people who've been brought together. They all think they're the best at what they do. But again, I don't think it has I never got the impression that it had anything to do with the fact that I'm the most manly man in the room. I'm the toughest person in this room, whether I'm a man, a woman, an alien, a penguin, or whatever. That's just my take.
Point. I think you're onto something, actually. I think you've really hit it, because I'm thinking of when Michael Madsen as Mr. Blonde, when he says, are you going to bark all day, little doggy? Are you going to bite? Like, it's more about power. So I think, yeah, you're probably right. That's interesting. That's a good take. Another theme that seems to keep coming up here is competence. Like, I made a note of this. A lot of these guys aren't very competent. Like, for starters, Chris Penn is like the worst guy to put in charge of a crime gang. He's only there because of his dad, right? He doesn't really know what he's doing all that much. I think he's really loosey-goosey. I don't think he runs a really tight ship. That's probably why Tim Roth was able to kind of infiltrate the gang, But hang on, I didn't get the impression that Chris Penn's character was in that role. He knew these guys, but he wasn't in charge. Like, he didn't participate in the heist. That wasn't part of his skill set. I got the impression, and again, maybe this is the quote nice guy part of his name, is he's more the talker. He's the get to know them, get the people that he's the guy who goes out and finds these criminals and gets sort of a reading of their character and then recommends them to his father, who's clearly the brains of the operation. So, yeah, the fact that things are going wrong, I don't necessarily think you put that on Chris Penn's shoulder. I don't think that it's his failing that this thing went wrong. Overall, the heist is not planned very well. Like, I mean, I know Tim Roth tips off the cops. So that's an issue. But, they don't really have any plans in place, like in case things go wrong, because they do, other than we meet at the warehouse, But again, through the course of the film, you learn that there's an undercover cop in their crew. So the undercover cop has obviously tipped the police that they're going to hit this jewelry store on this day at this time, and this is where their hideout is. So again, had there not been an undercover cop in their crew, I think this heist probably would have worked the way they expected it to. And if it didn't, they would have been able to, as we saw, like they all ended up coming back to this warehouse. Well, if the cops didn't know where the warehouse was ahead of time, they probably wouldn't have found them quickly enough to stop them. So again, it's a lot of what if and maybes, but I guess we'll never know. One thing that I made a note of, everything is like lit really hot. So I don't know what that means. So as an actor, we used to always say that whenever a scene is really like flooded with light, like almost overly lit, you would say it's very hot. It's lit hot. And it seemed that every scene in this film is flooded with lights. And, obviously Tarantino wanted to give this movie a bit of a look. And I read somewhere that the lighting was so intense on some of the scenes that the fake blood on the floor was drying on the floor because the lights were so intense, So that was interesting. And then the other thing we got to touch base on is the non-linear storytelling. Yeah, so for sure. It's a tactic that's been used in films before, obviously. Probably the most famous example, definitely the most influential, I would say, is Citizen Kane. And Tarantino really is just getting warmed up, when he's doing this, because he really uses this technique well in Pulp Fiction, which is probably the best, non-linear storytelling in American cinema history. Yeah, you got no arguments with me here, man. Pulp Fiction is absolutely one of my top 3 all-time favorite movies, no question. And depending on the day of the week, it's number 1, probably just as often as it's not. So like you always say, yours are Jaws, Star Wars, and what's the third one? Raiders of the Lost Ark? Yes. Pulp Fiction absolutely makes my top 3 all day long. So yeah, anything good you want to say about that movie, I'm going to agree all the way. Now, one of the things that I do want to make a distinction when we talk about nonlinear storytelling, especially in the way that Tarantino does it, it's not just start with a sequence and then move the story back, say, 24 hours earlier, give you the buildup, and then end the movie with that same sequence, right? It's not like it doesn't start with guys pointing guns at each other. Oh, hey, how'd we get to this point? 24 hours earlier. Then you get a 2-hour movie that ends with these guys pointing guns at each other again. Personally, that particular type of storytelling,
I hate it. It is one of my least favorite TV tropes. You see it in television all the time. When that happens and I'm watching something, I really have to struggle not to turn it off or change the channel. I feel it's lazy storytelling. That is absolutely not the way Quentin Tarantino does it. When we mean nonlinear, we literally mean it's going to go backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. And he's not showing you just here we are now, let's go back and then get back to where we are. It's this all over the place. And part of what makes nonlinear storytelling work is the way you can reveal details at a certain pace. So like, again, we know, or we suspect at the beginning of the movie, somebody's an undercover cop. They make that pretty clear once they get to the warehouse in the first 10 minutes. Then as we start to get these sort of flashback nonlinear sequences where we get to know each of the members of the heist one by one, you know, the number of suspects starts to get reduced. So you see Harvey Keitel's background. Okay, well, clearly he's not the thing. You know, you see Michael Madsen's background. Okay, well, clearly he is not the cop, right? So the list of suspects starts getting shorter and shorter and shorter through this flashback. And again, I think it's a really clever way to let us, the audience, know who the mole is, but not right away. Whereas if you had told that story in a linear fashion, you'd pretty much have to spill the beans on that right away. You would almost have to start the movie. Like if the movie was told in a linear sense, it would start with Tim Roth's character in the diner being told he's going to go undercover, studying the commode story. And again, without all of the rah-rah of what we know is to come, that sequence, that you can't open a movie with that. No one's going to be interested. You need to know who these characters are. So the fact that, you know, it's a pacing thing, it's a way to introduce characters. I think Tarantino just does it so well.
We obviously have not covered Pulp Fiction, and maybe we will sometime. And I think one of the reasons we haven't done it yet is just because it's been so overdone. You know? Well,
and I think we both probably agree on so many things that who wants to listen to two guys gush about their favorite movie for 2 hours?
Yeah, and it's better because I hate your movies. So one thing I want to mention was, I told my wife we're going to watch, we're going to do this movie for the podcast, and she winced. And
she's seen it?
Yeah, and I was like, well, what's going on? And she's like, I can't stand that scene where the cop cuts the guy cuts the cop's ear off. And I was like, well, what was so bad about that scene? Like, what about that scene really, really got you? I'm curious. And she's like, it's so gross and it's so violent and bloody.
No, it's not.
And that's the magic of the scene, because I think if you asked people about, that scene, like she was a good example, they might just say, like my wife did, that it's just Tarantino glorifying violence. It's just a horribly bloody scene. But it's the exact opposite of that. I said to my wife, I was like, you never see him get his ear cut off. And she would believe me. And so we watched the movie, and the scene's coming up, and she's getting all tensed up. And guess what happens? The camera pans away and points to the wall. All you see is a wall.
Yep.
You hear the cop screaming in pain, but you don't actually see anything. And that's what makes the scene so good. And it's what makes it so much better than what it could have been. I think a lesser director would have used the opportunity to show off a ton of blood, try and make this kind of mark, by showing this ultra violent scene. But instead, Tarantino does something that's way more powerful, and he uses the audience's imagination. That's what made Jaws so effective, right?
I was going to say, Spielberg did the same thing in Jaws. Yeah. I mean, partly by accident, but the fact that you're not seeing the shark makes it more. And you see that with a lot of horror movies. Your imagination can make the scene in your mind seem a lot scarier than actually showing you something, right? A movie monster jumps out on screen, you immediately judge it. Does it look realistic? Is this something I believe? Is it a guy in a rubber suit? Is it computer generated? But if all we're seeing are reaction shots from the characters and we're not actually seeing what they see, your mind is going to make up something way different than whatever the director could possibly put on screen. So no, I agree with what, and we talked about this a little bit before already when we talked about violence in movies. Yeah, no, I think it was a clever way to do it. And exactly like you said, I think what people think they remember is not what actually happened. And when that scene came on, I'll be honest, when I was rewatching this movie earlier this week, I didn't sit and watch every scene, because as I said before, for me, I like to enjoy it almost like a stage play where I'm just listening, or a radio play, I'm listening to the dialogue. But when that scene was coming up, I sat down and I watched intently, because I know we had talked about this before and I knew we were going to talk about it again tonight. And you're 100% right. But so from this, I think this is a good segue into talking about the music of this movie.
Well, just before we get to that,
okay.
I want to just say this because people always blame Tarantino for excessive and gratuitous violence in his movies, but the violence is never glorified. You could make the argument, and I will, that the opposite of that is true. Like Tarantino doesn't show the violence; he shows the aftermath of the violence. And for me, that's why it's not glorified, right? Like you see the cop talking to Tim Roth's character, and he tells him his name. He mentions that he's married and he's a dad. So to me, Tarantino humanizes the violence, if that makes any sense. Like he shows you the consequences of what happened. So as far as I'm concerned, there's way more glorification of violence in mainstream Hollywood movies than there is in Tarantino films. Like,
yeah, I agree.
When Arnold Schwarzenegger cuts off a guy's arm and says something like, "Oh, now I'm going to call you Lefty," like that glorifies violence.
Yeah.
It makes it like fodder for humor and it desensitizes the audience. But when you show the consequences of violence like Tarantino does, I think it helps to humanize things and hopefully sensitize people to the fact that violence has consequences, And I don't know. I think that's one of the great things about Tarantino. But anyway, so you want to talk about the music, which is a big part.
The last thing I want to talk about was the music. So I think one important note. So this definitely has we talked about top 10 soundtracks, and this is part of the reason I talked about it because I knew we were going to get to this topic later. So this movie and Pulp Fiction, as many of Tarantino's films, I feel have great soundtracks. Tarantino, like you said, he grew up watching movies. He's a pop culture guy, and a big part of his influence, he said, is music. And a lot of times he's said that as he's creating a scene or he's writing a sequence, he has certain songs in mind that help influence his creative process. And I think that that's abundantly clear in Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, where certain scenes probably would never be the same if a different music was playing or if no music was playing. And in some cases, the song or the theme of the song or the literal lyrics of the song are reflective of what's going on in the scene of the movie, or maybe is the opposite, where you would have like a happy, cheery song in a sequence where, something evil is happening, or the other way around. And Tarantino does this very, very well. And this is a good example. And I love this framing device of, well, if it's supposed to take place in 1992 when the movie was shot, how do you get away with having a 1970s music soundtrack that makes sense? And so right away in the first 2 minutes of the movie, they talk about, hey, are you listening to the retro weekend K-Billy super sounds of the 70s where, again, it's like so many problems in science fiction movies where they don't explain things, where one line of dialogue is all you need. And then everyone goes, oh, okay, I get it. And you move on. That's exactly what Tarantino did here with the 70s soundtrack. He just made it clear through the dialogue of the characters that the local channel is doing a 70s weekend. And boom, now he can do all the songs he wants. And then he's got, who's the DJ? Stephen Wright, is that his name?
Yes.
Do it, a great voice. And so he's doing the DJ and he's introducing the songs, and he, just like a radio DJ would, he gives you those little trivia tidbits. And again, part of the reason that I think Tarantino wanted to do that was the audience is probably not going to know a lot of these songs. Like I didn't know most of these songs when I saw this movie. And the fact that I heard the DJ introducing a lot of them, it's like, oh, that's what that song's called. Oh, that's who sings that. So I thought it was a clever way for Tarantino to again, bring this music that he loves to sort of a new generation of pop culture, to new movie going audience. And then this scene that we were talking about a minute ago with the cutting off the ear, you've got the Stuck in the Middle with You. You ask, 9 out of 10 people you stop on the street, if you're like, let me play you a song and tell me what you think of, you play that song for them, 9 out of 10 people are going to go, oh, that's from the cut off the ear sequence in Reservoir Dogs. Like it's synonymous now. You can't imagine one without the other.
I know. Has there ever been a scene more tied to a song than the ear cutting scene in that? Like, it'd be interesting for us to explore that sometime.
Yeah. And then of course, one of the things that, again, I didn't really realize until I was doing the homework for this, there's no score. There's no musical score for this movie. The only music you hear are the songs that are coming from the radio on the sounds of the Super 70s weekend, or whatever it's called. I'm sure I screwed that up. That's it. You have the literal songs. That's the only music. And it's obviously it's unusual because most movies have some sort of score. And the fact that this one doesn't, you don't really realize you miss it. And then again, it sort of just is like the music becomes punctuation. When you do hear the music, it's usually because it's related to the scene or something important is happening. Otherwise, it's all dialogue. So we don't want you, we want you to listen to what they're saying. We don't want you to be listening to the sound of the score in the background. Again, it's a deliberate choice by a filmmaker to decide, I'm not going to make the score. What I want you listening to is I want you to listen to what they're saying. I want you to listen to the way they're saying it. And it's an interesting choice, and I think it worked very well.
That's a good point. One last thing I want to mention too is I don't think we could talk about Reservoir Dogs and not talk about the Mexican standoff. So basically, this is where several people end up all end up pointing guns at each other.
Stop pointing that gun at my dad!
Yeah. And there's no way out of it. There's no way anyone can come out a winner, right? And Tarantino likes to use this in his films. He used it really well in Pulp Fiction. I thought in the diner scene. Yeah. Remember that when Samuel L. Jackson is able to talk everybody down by mentioning Fonzie, which is great. You don't love that. But, in this film, the Mexican standoff comes to its inevitable ending, and I'm not sure of the exact origin of the Mexican standoff in cinema, but I think it was probably made popular first, sort of in the mainstream with The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Yeah. But you could make the point that Tarantino really brought it kind of back into the pop culture zeitgeist. Maybe him and John Woo too, but
yeah, that's fair.
That's
fair. The only other question I had about this movie was at the end when after everyone gets shot and Harvey Keitel's character is there and Tim Roth's bleeding out, and then Tim Roth's character looks up at him and he says, "I'm a cop." I don't understand why he tells him that, because then it's clear that Harvey Keitel just shoots him in the head. Yeah, it's like, well, by coming out and confessing that you're this cop, that's it. Your life's over. Unless Tim Roth's character at that point realizes, I've lost so much blood. Yeah, he's dead. There's no way I'm living through this. I just want to clear my conscience. That's the only explanation I could think of.
That was kind of my takeaway from it. And then the ending, of course, you felt that Mr. Pink doesn't get away, right? He gets out and gets shot.
Yeah. If you listen intently, although what you're seeing on the screen is not necessarily the only thing you're hearing, in the background, you can hear another scene playing out where Mr. Pink has gone out and you can hear the police shouting things like, "Put the gun down, put the gun down." Like they're clearly engaging him off camera. And again, when you're watching it, you don't necessarily pick up on that. But when you're not watching it with your eyes and you're just listening, you can pick up those little details. It's like in the Pulp Fiction diner scene. It happens at the beginning of the movie and at the end of the movie. At the beginning of the movie, if you're listening intently and you're not watching it, you can hear Samuel L. Jackson talking.
Right.
So
good points. So let's rate it. Out of 10, what would you give it?
Probably an 8 or 8.5. Probably an 8.5.
I would go 9.
Yeah.
I'll go 9. I think it's that good. And a great debut.
It's very good.
For a great director.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
All right. So on that note,
Fun with Caveman.
All right, Derek, it was my movie this week. That means it's over to you, my friend, for trivia. What do you got?
Okay, so this movie's called Reservoir Dogs.
It is.
And so you were talking before about how a lot of filmmakers begin their career making a heist movie.
Yes.
And what I noticed when I was putting this trivia together, a lot of movies that have been nominated for the Best Picture Oscar have animals in the title of the movie. So I've got a
dogs.
List.
That's interesting.
So
right?
I've got a list of 10 movies that were all nominated for Best Picture. Many of them won, and they all have the name of an animal in the name of the title of the movie.
And they won the Oscar.
No, some of them. They were all nominated for Best Picture.
Okay.
A couple of them won. I didn't flag it, although we could probably go down the list and figure it out as we go. So I've got 10 movies, 10 Best Picture nominees. I'm going to read you the synopsis of the movie, and you give me the title. And the hint is it's been nominated for Best Picture, and the title has an animal's name in the title. Okay?
All right.
I can also give you the year if you're getting stuck, but I think for most of these, you'll get it without the year. All right. Actually, I'm going to just give you the year because some of them are newer, and I think without the year, you're not going to get it. So this is from
the year. But this is from pretty good with the Oscars, so I think I could do good.
Okay. Well, do you want the year or not?
Yeah, give me the year.
Okay. So first one's from 2018. The heir to a hidden kingdom must step forward to lead his people into a new future and must confront a challenge from his country's past.
That was 2018?
Yep.
I don't know.
That would be the Black Panther.
Oh, okay. All right.
All right. From 2013, this true story follows the hero's rise as he becomes a wealthy stockbroker living the high life to his fall involving crime, corruption, and the federal government.
Oh, that's The Wolf of Wall Street.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
All right. The next one from 1991. A young law enforcement agent must receive the help of an incarcerated and manipulative killer to help catch another serial killer.
Oh, Silence of the Lambs.
Yes. All right. This one's a little tougher. From 2016, a 5-year-old foreign boy is adopted by a loving couple after getting lost hundreds of miles from home. 25 years later, he sets out to find his lost family.
No idea.
It was a movie called Lion.
Okay.
It starred Dev Patel from Slumdog Millionaire.
Oh, he sure did.
All right. 2019 is a more recent one. A young boy in Hitler's army finds his mother is hiding a Jewish girl in their home.
No idea.
Jojo Rabbit.
Oh, okay.
You've obviously never seen it. It's quite good.
I heard of it, though.
Written and directed by Taika Waititi, who did, well, anyway, we'll go into him another time. All right, 2010. A committed dancer struggles to maintain her sanity after winning the lead role in a production of a famous ballet.
Oh, was that the one with, what's her face? From the Star Wars prequels. I hate those movies.
She won an Oscar for this movie. It was nominated for Best Picture. Yes, Black Swan. Good job. Yes. Nice, got it. I was getting worried you're going to not get any of them here. All right. This one I think is a little easier for you. An American soldier assigned to a remote Western outpost befriends the local animals and people, making him an intolerable aberration in the military in this period drama.
What year was it?
1990.
1990. I don't know.
Got an animal in the title. Nominated for Best Picture.
No.
Dances with Wolves.
Oh, jeez. I never saw it, so I don't know.
All right. 1975. A criminal pleads insanity and is admitted to a mental institution where he rebels against the oppressive nurse and rallies up the scared patients.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Hey, there we go. Nice. All right. This one's a little tougher. From 2017. An artistically inclined 17-year-old girl comes of age in Sacramento, California.
Oh, God, I think I know this movie. Oh, what the hell was the name of it? Lady Bird.
Yes! Good job.
I saw that. It was really good.
It was actually on TV today. I was like, oh, hey, look there.
Oh, I saw that.
All right.
That's the beginning where she jumps out of the car. Oh, that was a good movie.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Last one, number 10. This is a nice, easy one for you. From 1978, right in your wheelhouse.
Okay.
3 lifelong friends from a small industrial town in Pennsylvania ship out to Vietnam, where their dreams of military honor are quickly shattered by the inhumanities of war.
Ah, Michael Cimino's The Deer Hunter.
There we go. Nice. All right.
2 short years later, he lost his career by making Heaven's Gate. Oh, baby. Oh, yes.
So there you go. There was a lot of movies that had animal names in the title, but I was shocked to find how many were nominated for Best Picture. So
quite a few nominated for Best Picture. Wasn't The Elephant Man nominated for Best Picture too back in 1980? That would have been.
Oh, maybe. Honestly, I'm putting the trivia together. Once I got to 10, I'm like, that's enough.
Okay, good. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is another one that I just thought of too. That was a good movie too. God,
that was a good one.
Yep. And then of course Raging Bull. God, now they're all coming to me. You should. Oh, yeah. Okay. So next week we're going to come back with a topic. So we'll be back with that. And until then, this is Chris McBrien for Derek Myers saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.